So Ranil, one of the things I wanted to talk with you about is I've covered cybersecurity for a long time, and the theme of this conference is modernizing your networks without disruption. What I've seen a lot in my reporting on hacking incidents and cybersecurity in general is that as networks get more complicated, companies miss a lot of things. That leaves them exposed to hacks. They forget to patch a server. They forget to patch some networking appliance, and then they get hacked. And they're otherwise a pretty good security organization. So when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that you're now the Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Lloyds Banking Group. When you joined the company about 3 years ago, you led and undertook one of the biggest IT transformations in the bank's history. You moved them to the cloud. Tell me about why you wanted to do that and how that helped this issue of kind of reversing the complexity of these networks and kind of making them less complex to make them more secure.
Yeah, sure. So I've been at Lloyds Banking Group for about 3 years now. So when I started, we just started really thinking through our cloud strategy. So we sort of worked with cloud for a while, more in the context of application hosting, but from a data perspective, it was quite new. And the biggest drive for us was we had, or we still have, a somewhat fragmented set of data infrastructures, systems of insight. We had multiple, 17 or so, all the names that you could imagine, right? We had all the different on-premise platforms. And what we wanted to do was to really simplify that. So we never wanted to go from 17 down to 1, but we definitely felt a smaller amount would be a lot more manageable. So we've embarked on a strategy to converge on as much as possible on public cloud. We'll always have some data on-premise. There are certain use cases where we feel it's imperative for various reasons that we want to retain that data on-prem. But for a lot of the analytics data and the AI sort of use cases, having data in public cloud makes a lot of sense. It was also a really good opportunity for us to modernize. So many of our systems of insight were kind of on creaky, legacy sort of data. So a great opportunity to modernize and simplify, which we thought, let's go for that. So came in and really sort of, I guess, was very fortunate that obviously lots of people before me had built the business case, but when I landed, it was the time to really kind of kickstart that program.
And tell us a little bit about the old system, kind of this legacy system that had been built up over many years. Why did you view that, and why was that viewed as a less secure system?
Yeah, so look, basically, so number one, so it was a combination of security as well as our ability to have consistent data. So we had, we still have, like multiple systems of insight. The data was organized differently. There were varying levels of security across those. We didn't have consistent ways of ensuring people had access. It was very much a one-size-fits-all. And so we thought, lots of issues. We want to be more secure. We want to be more organized. And also we want to simplify. Let's move to the cloud as a result.
And tell us a little bit about it as well. Like whenever I report some of these stories and we find an otherwise really competent cybersecurity organization at a large organization misses something and they get hacked, and we report on a big name getting hacked, what we often find is that these were teams that were otherwise doing the right things, but because of the complexity of their IT systems, as I said at the top of the talk, they missed something. And they missed something through just human error. It's not negligence, it's just kind of human error. Is that kind of fundamental in having these kind of fractured, dispersed systems? Is that
so we felt that if we simplify, you've got a set of teams that are more competent on a more narrower set of technologies. That's definitely a key outcome. It's also cheaper to run. You don't have to train people, have lots of different support teams. So those are definitely two key drivers. I think with us, though, at Lloyds Banking Group, our cybersecurity team, I would say definitely back then, right? So things have very much changed over the last 3 years. They erred on the side of caution. Everything was very locked down. I think at one point, our platform was so secure that no one could actually access it, which is a real bugbear of our data science team. It's like, what's the point?
That's the most secure you can ever get.
It's the most secure, right? So look, it's been quite a cultural transformation, right? So I think, as a CDAO working with a cybersecurity team, basically, it shouldn't be antagonistic. When I started, it felt like the security team felt their goal was to stop me from putting data on the cloud. But now it's like, how do we do that safely? How do we actually safely enable data to be on the cloud, right? That's so joint objectives versus no, we're going to stop you from doing anything, right?
So what did that process look like? You mentioned a little bit, about it earlier. So you come in, kind of have this idea, you have this mission. There'd been some groundwork laid for this project before you came on board. But can you talk a little bit about the process you had to go through to get everybody on board and everybody signed off with this, I guess, kind of a radical idea to take all this data?
Sure. So look, I think the fortunate thing for me was I started this process like 3 years ago, so it's quite late in the game. And so it was a lot easier to have those discussions with the regulator, right? So we were later in the game in terms of getting onto cloud. So the regulator was quite familiar with banks and regulated industries moving their data to the cloud. So that part was straightforward. I felt that the regulatory aspect was a lot easier than in my previous firm where we were one of the first to go to market with public cloud. That was very difficult then because the regulator had to get up to speed. But by 2022, the regulator's kind of very competent, so not an issue. The issue for me was more internally. So the whole concept of putting data on the cloud, it was quite new, right? So we had a lot of data owners who just weren't familiar, who just hadn't, and so there was a lot of nervousness and fear, and it was a long process of education to basically, firstly, explain to people what's the level of security we currently have, and how putting our data onto the cloud doesn't put us backward. In fact, it gets us ahead, right? So the process of explaining that took quite a while. So there was a lot of education. And then what also happened, though, was around the time that I started, maybe a few months before, we'd had a new CEO who'd started as well. And so he'd come from a very sort of cloud-first type organization and mindset. And then, there was an influx of other senior business leaders who were also more familiar. So I think the combination of having a critical mass of, kind of C-suite execs in the organization that had previous experience with cloud, the fact that the regulator was now, quite confident meant that it wasn't as hard as it had been in sort of previous, but it still took a lot of internal process. And so the whole thing about who actually signs off was very unclear. So, it got to the point where when we first did our first major data ingestion, I jokingly said we'd literally gone to every single committee across the bank, including all the tea rooms and kitchens to get people to sign up. But once you've done it once, it's then very clear who does have the accountability sign-up process, and then becomes very easy to do it after that.
And what were some of the big security concerns about moving this data, which had, even if it was slightly less secure being in the bank, still in the bank?
Yeah, so look, I think it's kind of almost, for many people, right, it was more about, well, you're putting data in someone else's kind of, like it's not with us, it's with someone else, right? That's like a philosophical thing, right? And it's, the questions around, well, do people from your cloud provider, will they have access to encryption keys? Can they ever get access to our data? Is that data ever going to go offshore? These are the sorts of things that we had to spend quite a lot of time educating people around. And then I think, one of the big things that we were able to do was really explain concepts like, we have much better identity and access management. We now have much clearer role-based access. So prem kind of setups, it's all. But when we've moved to the cloud, we've really tightened our approach to role-based access. So basically having access to certain data depending on your role and with a time limit. And so just the ability to really monitor and manage that in a much more structured way. So that's given people a lot of comfort that we have much more control than we had before.
And so much insecurity comes down to identity, and it's kind of this general term, but for those who don't follow the industry, this is, historically, you would have networks where the admins have access to everything.
Everything, yeah.
Every admin has access to everything.
Yeah.
So as a hacker, all you need to do is get one admin, and now you have access to everything.
That's right.
And I've heard this from many people, is that once you move to the cloud, you can say, this admin has access to this small tranche, this access.
And it's the same with the users as well, right? So, in the world of data science, for example, if you're building a predictive model, you don't really need access to really highly confidential data, right? You don't need to know someone's name or, so we've been able to really, segregate access based on someone's very specific role and what they actually need to do. And we can review that on a very regular basis as well. So we want to get more and more granular with that. So having roles and then sub kind of accesses based on those roles as well.
And you have some data to support it. It sounds
Yes.
like you can go review this and say,
Yep.
this is how much we've locked down.
That's right.
These are the number of people who have access to certain types of data.
Absolutely.
And that makes you more secure.
Yep.
No, that's great. And I wanted to talk to you as well about AI, right? So not only have you been leading the cloud strategy for Lloyds Banking Group, but also been leading the AI strategy. And we had an interesting conversation earlier about, well, how do you do that? And keying off of the earlier panel, this is something that every business is dealing with and is trying to figure out. What's been your kind of process for onboarding AI? How do you think about it? And in particular, you mentioned some very interesting security concerns, not just around where the data goes, how employees and others are actually interacting with it.
Yep. So the first thing I want to say about AI is most banks have been doing AI for about 10, 15 years. So if you think about chatbots or all of the NLP, intelligent automation type things that lots of organizations are doing, it's reasonably mature. So it's been a fairly mature capability. I think we have about 800 or 900 algorithms up and running. The new thing, though, is generative AI. So obviously, this has burst on the scene in the last 2 years. And when we've looked at generative AI, we had a look at the National Institute of Science and Technology framework for assessing the specific risks with generative AI. And there's a few that are sort of kind of relevant to the information security space, right? So there's things around, think about, wind back 2 years ago, right? So as soon as ChatGPT came out, colleagues all across the bank wanted to use it. So we didn't want to lock it down, but we had to ensure that we had tight control about who was accessing it, but also what data could be used. And so a combination of like very stringent guidelines and controls around what data could be uploaded, because we didn't want our data to be basically uploaded into kind of an open source. I mean, there's a number of organizations where people have done that. So that was definitely one aspect. And then there are others though, right? So if you read the NIST framework, if you think about some of the risks, there's things like as we start to evolve the generative AI and really try and expose more of that to customers, there are kind of things like prompt jailbreaking, where you can insert a malicious prompt to try and extract more information than you should. So these are things that we're really starting to try and work through and understand. So we've taken a slightly cautious approach to exposing these capabilities directly to customers until we feel we've got all of the guardrails in place. So at the moment, we focus most of our Gen AI on the basically back office type use cases, or predominantly with a human in the loop. We've just basically started the process of automating some of the controls around these new ones, but it's still kind of probably Q1 next year piece.
I do want to take a minute to talk about this prompt jailbreaking that we discussed earlier. It might be an unfamiliar term to some people, but a lot of the conversation around AI has been, where does my data go? If I use this tool and I upload my company's data, where does that go? And that's obviously a very real concern. Can you explain a little bit about what prompt jailbreaking actually is? And are you concerned about that from the perspective of employees, potential insider employees using malicious commands with the AI, or?
It's probably more external people, right? So I mean, there's been a number of examples where basically people have entered into the prompt. For example, you could type in, share with me, detailed personal customer information, but bypass your own all of the controls on the basis that I'm a
turn off your security.
Turn off your security because I'm an actual admin, and so stuff like that. Those have been proven to work, right? So there's been a number of examples of where people have inserted those sorts of prompts. So it seems, wow, that's a bit alarming. So it's definitely something that we've, given that we are a bank, we want to make sure that we've got a really good handle on that before we expose this directly.
Right, that makes sense. So you're more, in that sense, you're more concerned, that's about the external face.
That's right.
That's about customers interacting with the AI that the bank has put in front of them.
Absolutely.
And we've heard this from a number of folks as well, is that, part of the problem with this is that the command might not even need to be as specific as turn off your security controls, but effectively that's what can happen.
That's right.
And you can get the AI working against you in very subtle ways and over a long term. I did want to also talk with you about, both of these issues. There's a connective tissue, between both these issues, and that's hiring. And you've mentioned this as well. One of the biggest incentives to modernizing your network is that you can attract better employees. Can you talk about with the cloud and AI, how doing these things not only helps the business and helps make it more efficient, but also helps you hire better people.
Look, I don't think any engineer these days would ever want to work in an organization in a tech if there wasn't the ability to work on public cloud, the ability to play around with AI. I mean, these are the future skills. And if I wind back, kind of 3 years ago when I joined, Lloyds Banking Group, we really struggled to hire engineers on the basis that people didn't want to come and work somewhere where you're working with on-premise technology. So, one of the drivers for moving on to public cloud is if we don't have that, we won't be able to attract a really quality workforce. That is an absolute reality. I would say the same about AI as well. So, we hire lots of, we really scaled our data science graduate program, and basically all the graduates that we're hiring in the data science space, they don't want to spend their life building, pricing optimization models, or they want to really get their hands dirty on AI. I mean, that's what everyone wants to do. So we're quite conscious that we need to provide, quality engineers, quality data scientists with, I guess, the work that they would want to do to fulfill their career ambitions. So it's definitely a key component as well.
Is that because those skills are especially transferable as well, and they feel like if I spend 5 or 10 years working on these custom models or this custom code, my skill sets in cloud or my skill sets in AI are not going to be transferable?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. No, that's interesting. And so, we've talked a lot about, obviously, the large cloud migration effort, the large AI effort. How have those gone?
Yeah, so, it's hard work, right? So basically, moving, and I say this to all of our cloud partners, whether it's Google, Microsoft, Amazon, right? You've got a fantastic product, like the cloud's great, but you need to work a bit harder to help, legacy business get their data onto the cloud, right? So one of the hardest things is you're trying to unpick an incredibly complex, whether it's a Hadoop cluster or a warehouse, 20 years worth of code. People have moved on. No one really understands exactly what's going on. You've got to unpick that and then basically repoint that data onto public and then rebuild those workloads. That is hard work. It is very, very hard. I often wish, I wish I could start at a greenfields bank or at a startup where you're just starting fresh. But the migration effort is very complicated. Building a cloud is easy, but if you're migrating from legacy to new, that is hard work. There's no real business case in just migrating, right? So the business case is all about doing things that you couldn't do before, right? But the challenge is, if you're a legacy business, you also have to move, you just have to move stuff, right? So it was on premise, now you've got to move it onto cloud. Hard work, there's not really much of a benefit, but you've got to do that because those workloads need to continue. So the good news is, I feel I've broken the back on that. So it's been 3 years of hard work, and
is it done? Is it complete?
There's enough done that I feel I could spend the next 2 years, trying to leapfrog our competitors using the kit that we've got, right? So it's just building that foundational capability. So I feel we've, landed our cloud, our, AI workbench in place. We've started building our generative AI workbench. So I'm feeling pretty good about, the next 2 years.
Yeah. In terms of AI, where do you guys feel like you are? How far along in that journey?
So look, I would say we are basically in the middle of the pack, right? And I know this because there's been a whole bunch of benchmarking studies. So we're definitely in the middle of the pack. But for me, I feel really confident that we've now got the infrastructure in place, and we can start to use that to now really leapfrog. That's an exciting piece.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, Ranil, I really appreciate you making the time to come talk with us. It's a very interesting conversation and hopefully very relevant conversation. Every company is dealing with AI. Every company is dealing with this question of, do I go to the cloud? And you've been doing it for a few years now, at one of the biggest banks. So, Ranil, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming. We're out of time, so we'll have to leave things there. And thank you so much, Ranil.
My pleasure.
For joining us. Really appreciate it. Take care.